I started working at McDonald's when I was 19, the youngest on our crew by at least 3 years. Most of my coworkers were college students or young parents working for extra income. Our location was right off the interstate, making it popular with travelers and truckers passing through town. I usually worked closing shifts from 4 p.m. to midnight because the manager liked having someone young and energetic for the dinner rush. The first few months were pretty uneventful, just normal fast food work. Clean the lobby, restock supplies, deal with occasional difficult customers. Nothing that would make you think twice about showing up for your shift. My manager, Dave, was cool. He'd been with the company for 15 years and treated us fairly. The crew was tight-knit, almost like a small family. We'd cover for each other when someone needed to swap shifts or leave early. It was a Tuesday in late October when things started getting weird. I was working the front counter when this well-dressed guy came in. He looked like a businessman, nice suit, expensive watch, probably in his 40s. He ordered a coffee and sat in the corner booth with his laptop. Nothing unusual there. We often had business travelers stop in to use our Wi-Fi. But I noticed he kept looking over at me while pretending to work on his computer. Around the same time, I started getting friend requests on social media from people I didn't know. I normally ignored them, but there were suddenly a lot more than usual. One account had somehow found photos of me that I hadn't even posted publicly. When I mentioned it to my coworker, Alicia, she just shrugged it off as creepy internet stuff and told me to make my accounts private. I followed her advice, but still felt uneasy. The businessman returned a few days later, this time with a younger guy who looked like he could be his assistant. They sat in the same corner booth, and I caught them pointing at me a couple times. When I brought their food over, the older man asked a lot of questions: where I was from, if I was in school, if I lived nearby. I gave vague answers, feeling uncomfortable with his interest. He left a $20 tip on a $12 meal, telling me I seemed like a smart kid with potential. After that, one of them would show up at least twice a week, always during my shifts. The younger guy started making small talk, saying his boss was impressed with my customer service skills and might have a job opportunity for me. He mentioned it paid much better than fast food cash under the table, no taxes. When I hesitated, he slipped me a business card with just a phone number and told me to think about it. Dave noticed their frequent visits and pulled me aside one day. "Those guys been bothering you, Jake?" I explained the job offer, thinking he might be impressed I was getting headhunted. Instead, his face grew serious. "Listen, I've been in this business a long time. Legitimate recruiters don't hang around fast food places looking for teenagers to hire off the books. Something's not right there." I decided to ignore the business card, but the men became more persistent. The younger guy cornered me in the parking lot after my shift one night, saying his boss was getting impatient and really wanted to meet with me. He mentioned the job involved traveling to different cities, staying in nice hotels, meeting important people. When I said I wasn't interested, his friendly demeanor changed. "You're making a mistake, kid. This is a limited time offer." I started becoming paranoid after that encounter. I'd noticed the same car parked across from the restaurant during my shifts. My coworkers thought I was overreacting, except for Alicia. She'd worked at a truck stop before this job and said she'd seen similar recruitment tactics used by trafficking rings. They look for young people who seem isolated or need money. They offer jobs that sound too good to be true, because they are. One night, while taking out trash to the dumpster, I spotted the younger guy sitting in a car at the far end of the parking lot. He was watching the back door like he was waiting for someone. I ducked back inside and told Dave, who walked me to my car when my shift ended. The next day, Dave informed everyone about a new buddy policy. No one takes out trash or leaves the building alone after dark. About a week later, a new customer started coming in regularly. Unlike the businessman, this was a woman in her 30s who always ordered the same thing: large fries and a Diet Coke. She was friendly, often complimenting my service or asking how my day was going. After several visits, she mentioned she was a photographer looking for models for a clothing catalog. "You have the right look we're searching for," she said, sliding me a glossy business card. "The pay is excellent for just a few hours' work." I was immediately suspicious, but her approach was different. She showed me professional-looking photos on her phone of young men modeling casual clothes. Everything seemed legitimate on the surface. When I mentioned it to Dave, he took the business card and said he'd check it out. The next day, he confirmed what I'd feared: the company didn't exist. The address listed was an abandoned office building. Things escalated when I received a text from an unknown number saying they knew where I lived and my parents' names. They mentioned specific details about my routine that only someone who had been watching me would know. I showed the message to Dave and my parents, who immediately contacted the police. The officer who took our report explained that human trafficking rings often work in coordinated teams, using different approaches to target potential victims. On the officer's advice, I changed my shifts to daytime hours and always had someone walk me to my car. For 2 weeks, things were quiet. No sign of the businessman or the photographer woman. I started to think maybe the police involvement had scared them off. Then, late one afternoon, a delivery driver came to the back door with packages addressed to our restaurant. Our regular guy was on vacation, so no one thought twice about it. I was helping unload the boxes when the driver suddenly pulled out a taser. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, trying to block me from the view of security cameras. "We're just going to take a little ride." I froze for a second, then knocked over a stack of boxes and ran toward the front of the restaurant, shouting for help. The driver bolted for his truck as my coworkers came running. By the time police arrived, he was long gone. The truck had been reported stolen 2 days earlier. Inside it, police found zip ties, duct tape, and a burner phone with texts coordinating pickup times and locations. The messages mentioned other targets at different restaurants across 3 states. What had seemed like isolated incidents turned out to be part of a larger trafficking operation targeting young fast food workers. After reviewing security footage, police identified the businessman and the photographer woman. Their investigation uncovered a sophisticated network that specifically recruited young people from service jobs, offering fake modeling contracts or too good to be true employment opportunities. They'd been operating in our area for months, with at least 2 successful abductions that authorities knew about. I'd been working the overnight shift at McDonald's for almost 8 months. Our location was just off the highway, about 40 minutes outside of town. Most nights were predictably quiet truckers, stopping for coffee, college kids grabbing food after parties, and the occasional insomniac looking for somewhere to kill time. You develop a 6th sense for trouble in this job. Most nights were uneventful, but there are always exceptions. The first time I saw them was a Tuesday in late November. It was around 2:30 a.m. when their minivan pulled into the parking lot. Nothing about the vehicle stood out: a standard gray model with some mud splattered on the license plate. 4 people came in: a middle-aged couple, a teenage boy about 16, and a girl who looked around 12. They were all wearing similar dark blue clothes, almost like uniforms. Not matching exactly, but close enough to notice. The man did all the ordering while the others sat silently in a corner booth. He was polite, but oddly formal, speaking in a monotone voice that made me uneasy. He ordered 4 identical meals, cheeseburgers with no pickles, small fries, and water. No variations, no substitutions. When I asked if they wanted any condiments, he stared at me for a beat too long before saying, "We bring our own." My coworker Miguel was working the grill that night. When I brought the order back, he glanced through the service window at the family. "Something off about them," he muttered. I nodded, feeling the same unexplainable discomfort. They weren't doing anything wrong, just sitting quietly, barely talking to each other. But there was something in their body language, the way they constantly scanned the restaurant, that felt rehearsed. The man returned to the counter with their tray after they'd finished eating. Every wrapper was neatly folded, the trays completely clean. "Bathroom?" he asked. I pointed to the hallway, and he nodded to his family. They all stood in unison and walked in a perfect line to the restrooms. The woman and girl went into the women's room while the man and boy entered the men's room. After about 15 minutes, Miguel nudged me. "They've been in there a long time." I was about to check when all 4 emerged simultaneously. The girl's sleeves were wet up to her elbows. The boy was carrying a small duffel bag that I hadn't noticed when they came in. They exited without another word, the bell above the door tinkling as they left. Our night cleaner, Ron, came out from the back as soon as they drove away. "You should see the bathrooms," he said, his face pale. "They're spotless. Like hospital clean. Someone scrubbed everything down sinks, toilets, walls, mirrors. Even used bleach by the smell of it." We checked the security cameras later. The family had indeed cleaned both bathrooms thoroughly, working with practiced efficiency. 2 weeks later, they returned. Same time of night, same order, same routine. This time, I noticed small details I'd missed before. The woman had a faded circular burn mark on her wrist. The teenage boy had a nervous tic. He would tap his fingers in sequence against his thumb whenever the man looked at him. The young girl never blinked when she looked at you, her gaze unnervingly steady. After they ate, they again cleaned the bathrooms meticulously. When I checked after they left, I found they'd left something behind, a small notebook wedged behind the trash can. Inside were pages of what looked like license plate numbers, dates, and locations, all written in tiny, precise handwriting. On the last page was a crude map of our restaurant, with X marks near the dumpsters and back entrance. I showed it to my manager the next morning, who called the police. The officer who came didn't seem particularly concerned. "Probably just a weird family with OCD," he suggested, flipping through the notebook. "The plates could be for anything: cars they're looking to buy, people who cut them off in traffic." When I mentioned how unsettling their behavior was, he shrugged. "Being creepy isn't illegal. Call us if they actually do something concerning." The family didn't return for nearly a month. I'd almost forgotten about them when their van pulled in around 3 a.m. on a particularly slow night. I was working with just one other person, Leah, who was new and hadn't seen them before. This time, there was a 5th person with them, a thin, pale man who looked to be in his 20s. He moved stiffly, like someone recovering from an injury, and kept his eyes on the floor. When they approached the counter, I noticed the teenage boy had a fresh bruise beneath his eye. The man ordered the same meals as before, plus an extra one for their new companion. They sat at their usual corner booth, but this time, something was different. The new guy was seated in the middle, with the family positioned around him like guards. He never touched his food. Halfway through their meal, the man nodded to the teenage boy, who escorted the new guy to the bathroom. I used the excuse of refilling the napkin dispensers to walk past their table. The woman grabbed my wrist as I passed, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your cameras," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "Are they all working?" I nodded, too startled to speak. She released me with a thin smile. "Good to know." 10 minutes later, the boy returned alone. He whispered something to the man, who nodded approvingly. The family finished their meal and left, but the fifth person never came back from the bathroom. After they drove away, I immediately checked the men's room. It was empty and spotless as usual. The back door, which was supposed to be locked, was slightly ajar. Leah and I reviewed the security footage, but the camera covering the back hallway had been tilted toward the ceiling. We could see the boy and the stranger enter the bathroom, but not the stranger leaving through the back door. I called the police immediately. This time, they took our concerns seriously. After taking statements and reviewing the footage, one officer stayed parked outside for the remainder of our shift. 2 days later, a detective came by with photos. "Do you recognize this man?" he asked, showing me a picture of the pale stranger who had come in with the family. When I confirmed it was him, the detective's expression darkened. "His name is Eric Marston. He disappeared from a gas station about 60 miles north of here 3 weeks ago. His family reported him missing." Over the next few weeks, I learned more details from the detective. The license plates in the notebook matched several vehicles reported stolen across 3 states. More disturbingly, some of the dates and locations corresponded with unsolved disappearances similar to Eric's. The family had been using our restaurant as some kind of waypoint in what appeared to be a string of abductions. The restaurant installed additional security cameras and implemented a buddy system for employees. No one was allowed to take out trash or check bathrooms alone. We were given panic buttons to wear on our lanyards, directly connected to the police station. For a while, every unfamiliar face that came through our doors made me tense up, expecting to see that family again. Almost 2 months passed without incident. I'd started to relax, thinking maybe the family had moved on to another location after we'd increased security. Then one night, just as I was starting my shift, a police car pulled into our lot. The detective who had been investigating the case wanted to show me some photos from a traffic stop in the next state. It was them, the same family, but with different clothes and haircuts. They'd been pulled over for a broken taillight, but something about their behavior made the officer suspicious enough to search their van. Inside, they found restraints, sedatives, different license plates, and IDs belonging to 3 missing persons. They were now in custody, but refusing to talk. What they discovered next chilled me to the bone. The family, if you could call them that, weren't actually related. They were a kidnapping ring who posed as a family to avoid suspicion. The parents were the leaders, while the children were actually victims who had been abducted years earlier and psychologically conditioned to assist with new abductions. The father would select targets, the mother would help subdue them, and the children would clean up any evidence. Their methodology was frighteningly efficient. They would identify vulnerable individuals, usually people traveling alone or working night shifts in isolated locations. They would visit potential sites multiple times to learn the patterns, security weaknesses, and camera placements. When they were ready, they would bring a victim to these locations to test how easily they could remove them without raising alarms. Our McDonald's had been used as one of their transfer points locations, where they would hand off victims to other members of their network. The bathrooms were cleaned not from compulsion, but to remove any forensic evidence. The notebook I'd found contained not just license plates of stolen vehicles, but also information about potential targets and drop-off points. Most disturbing of all was learning about the children. The teenage boy had been abducted at age 9 from a shopping mall. The girl had been taken from a playground at age 5. Both had been with their captors so long they could no longer remember their real names or families. The psychological control was so complete that even when questioned separately, they referred to their abductors as Mom and Dad and showed genuine distress at being separated from them. Eric Marston was found alive, though severely traumatized, in an abandoned property owned by an associate of the kidnapping ring. He had been the most recent in a string of abductions spanning nearly a decade. Authorities believed there were at least 7 more victims being held at various locations, and the investigation was ongoing. The detective thanked me for finding the notebook that broke the case. Most people would have ignored their odd behavior, he said. But you paid attention to the details that didn't add up. I didn't feel like a hero. I kept thinking about all the times the family had come into our restaurant, how I'd sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite place it. How many chances had there been to stop them sooner? Our McDonald's became part of a training program for fast food employees across the country, teaching them to recognize signs of trafficking and abduction. Security protocols were strengthened at all 24-hour locations, especially those near highways. For me, the experience forever changed how I view the people who walk through our doors each night. I still work the overnight shift, but I see everything differently now. The quiet family in the corner booth. The customer who asks too many questions about our schedule. The person who pays too much attention to our security cameras. Most are innocent, of course, just normal people getting a late-night meal. But I watch carefully anyway, remembering that evil often hides in the most ordinary disguises. The family is now serving multiple life sentences. The children are in specialized therapy programs, slowly recovering their true identities. Eric Marston has reunited with his family and become an advocate for missing persons awareness. And I still find myself cleaning the bathrooms extra thoroughly after my shifts, not to hide evidence, but to reclaim a space that was once used for something unimaginably dark. When I was 24, I started working the overnight shift at McDonald's near Pine Ridge Boulevard. It was the only one in our town that stayed open 24/7. I needed the extra money while finishing my degree, and the night differential was pretty good. Plus, weeknight shifts were usually quiet after 2 a.m., giving me time to study between customers. Our McDonald's was in a standalone building with a play place attached to the side, one of those indoor playgrounds with tubes, slides, and ball pits. During my shift, we'd lock the play place doors since it wasn't open overnight, though you could still see into it through the large windows connecting it to the main dining area. This happened during my 3rd month working there. I was on with just 2 other employees, Diane, who handled drive-thru, and Marco, who worked kitchen. That night was particularly slow, even for a Tuesday. Most of our time was spent cleaning and prepping for morning, since we barely had any customers after 1 a.m. Around 3:30 in the morning, I was wiping down tables in the dining area when I thought I saw movement in the play place. Just a quick flash of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned and stared through the windows, but didn't see anything unusual. I figured it was probably just shadows from cars passing by on the highway. I went back to the counter to sort receipt paper when I heard the unmistakable sound of the plastic slide in the play place. That hollow rumbling noise a body makes sliding down it. I froze in place, straining to listen. It was definitely coming from the play place, which was locked and completely dark, except for the dim safety lights. I called over to Marco. "Hey, did you hear that?" He was prepping the grill and shook his head. "Hear what?" I described the sliding sound, and he just shrugged it off. "Probably just the plastic expanding or contracting with temperature. These buildings make all kinds of noises at night." I tried to convince myself he was right. I went back to my tasks, but about 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was followed by what sounded like a child's giggle. Soft, but distinct. There was no mistaking it for anything else. I walked over to the windows dividing the dining area from the play place and peered in. The playground equipment was barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block the reflection when I saw it, a small shadow moving near the bottom of the slide. My heart started racing. I called out to Diane, "Is there somebody in the play place?" She came over, clearly annoyed at being pulled from drive-through. "It's locked up. Nobody could get in there," she said flatly. But as she stood next to me, we both heard the sliding sound again. Diane's expression changed immediately. "What was that?" she whispered. I pointed toward the slide. "I think there's a kid in there." We both stared for several seconds before Diane went to get the keys to check it out. Just as she left, I saw it again, clearer this time, a small figure, maybe 5 or 6 years old, climbing up the steps to the slide. I couldn't make out details in the darkness, just the silhouette moving with the strange, weightless quality that made me increasingly uneasy. "Hurry up with those keys," I called to Diane, not wanting to take my eyes off the figure. When she didn't answer, I reluctantly turned away to see where she was. Diane was standing frozen, keys in hand, staring at the play place. "Did you see that?" she whispered. When I nodded, she added, "We need to check the security cameras." We went to the manager's office, where the security monitor was. The camera covering the play place showed nothing empty playground equipment, no movement, no child. We looked at each other, confused. "Let's just go check it out," I said, taking the keys from her. Marco was oblivious, focused on cleaning the fryers. We went to the play place entrance, and I hesitated before unlocking it. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" I called through the door. Silence. When I finally unlocked the door, the air inside felt noticeably colder than the rest of the restaurant. We flipped on the lights and searched every tube, climbing structure and corner of the playground. Nothing. No child. No sign anyone had been there at all. The doors had been locked from the inside with no other way in or out. We were heading back to the main area when Diane grabbed my arm. "Wait, look." She pointed to the floor beneath the slide. There was a single, small footprint visible on the recently mopped floor. Just one, as if someone had jumped down from the slide and taken a single step before, disappearing. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. We quickly left, locking the door behind us. For the rest of the shift, we avoided looking toward the play place. I convinced myself it was just the weird effects of working overnight sleep deprivation playing tricks on me. When morning crew arrived, things felt normal again in the daylight. I might have forgotten about it, except it happened again the following week. I was wiping down the beverage station when I heard that same sliding sound, followed by the giggle. I didn't look up. I couldn't bring myself to. But Diane, who was nearby, whispered, "You hear it too, right?" After the third time, I asked some of the longtime employees if they'd ever experienced anything strange in the play place at night. That's when Rosa, who'd worked there for 15 years, told me about the accident. 8 years earlier, a little boy had hit his head coming down the slide during a birthday party. He seemed fine at first, but fell unconscious in the parking lot. He died at the hospital from a brain hemorrhage. Rosa lowered her voice. His parents sued the restaurant. The case was settled quietly, but they installed new safety features on the slides after that. Some of us think he still comes back to play sometimes. She said it so matter-of-factly that I got chills. The night cleaning crew refuses to go in there alone. After that, I noticed a pattern. The sounds only happened on Tuesday nights, the same day of the week as the accident. Sometimes we'd hear the slide, sometimes laughter, sometimes nothing at all. But the security cameras never showed anything, even when we were certain we'd seen movement. One night, about 6 months into my job, I was alone at the front counter. Diane had called in sick, and Marco was in the back storage area. I heard the slide sound, louder than ever before. Against my better judgment, I turned to look. There he was, at the bottom of the slide, a little boy, maybe 5 years old, wearing shorts and a striped t-shirt. For a brief moment, he looked completely solid and real. He turned toward me and smiled, not menacing, just a happy child's smile. Then he put his finger to his lips in a gesture before fading away like mist. I stood frozen, unable to move until Marco came back from storage. I quit the night shift the following week. I still eat at that McDonald's sometimes, but never after dark. And I never look toward the play place when I'm there. Sometimes, especially on Tuesday evenings as the restaurant is about to close, I notice parents hurrying their children out of the playground, the employees exchanging knowing glances. Most keep quiet about it, but the story has become something of a local legend. Younger employees get warned about Tuesday's child during training. Some say if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can still hear him playing on the slides, just a normal kid, enjoying the playground, not realizing that his time there should have ended long ago.
Subscribe to our channel for more scary stories. We would love to read your comments. Which story did you